The children of Haven's Rest were playing in the fields when the sky turned dark. Emma Walsh had been teaching her younger brother Tommy how to catch fireflies near the wheat maze when the first shadow passed overhead. She looked up, expecting to see storm clouds, but instead saw something impossible: massive ships shaped like teardrops, silent as death itself. The Cartel strike force had traveled for weeks to reach this small human colony. Captain Nextar studied the settlement below through his tactical display, noting the simple buildings and primitive technology. His orders were clear: harvest the young ones and leave. The Cartel Empire had been doing this for centuries across dozens of worlds. Children made the best slaves because they learned quickly and broke easily. Emma grabbed Tommy's hand as the first ship landed in the town square. Strange beings emerged, taller than humans with gray skin and 4 arms. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. Emma had never seen aliens before, but she knew danger when she saw it. "Run to the house," she whispered to Tommy, but it was already too late. Blue light erupted from the alien weapons, washing over the children playing in the fields. Emma felt her legs go numb and collapsed beside Tommy, who was crying for their mother. The stun beams were perfectly calibrated for young human nervous systems. Within minutes, over 100 children lay helpless on the ground. Nextar watched his soldiers work with professional efficiency. The gravity nets lifted the unconscious children and carried them toward the ships. No resistance came from the adult humans, who had also been stunned into submission. This was exactly how these operations should proceed: quick, clean, and profitable. Emma fought against the numbness creeping through her body. She could see her parents running toward them from their farmhouse, but more blue light dropped them to their knees. Her father was shouting something, but the words seemed to come from very far away. Her mother was reaching toward her, tears streaming down her face. The Cartel soldiers loaded the children into holding chambers aboard their ships. Emma found herself pressed against other kids from her school, all of them unable to move or speak. She recognized Ben from her math class and little Lucy, who lived down the road. Some of the children were crying silently, the only movement they could manage. Tommy was placed in the chamber next to hers. His eyes were wide with terror, and Emma wished she could comfort him. She had always protected her little brother from nightmares and bullies. Now she could not even reach out to hold his hand. The ships lifted off as quickly as they had arrived, leaving Haven's Rest in shocked silence. From space, Nextar could see the adult humans gathering around the landing sites, looking up at the sky. Their distress meant nothing to him. In a few days, these children would be processed and sold to buyers across the galaxy. The humans were too primitive to follow them, too weak to fight back. The journey to the processing station took 3 days. Emma slowly regained feeling in her body, but thick metal walls surrounded her. She could hear other children crying in nearby chambers. The ship made strange sounds as it traveled through space, noises unlike anything from home. Corvac 7 appeared ahead of them like a metal mountain floating in the void. The asteroid had been hollowed out and converted into a massive facility where the Cartel Empire processed slaves from across the galaxy. Thousands of young beings from dozens of species were held here, waiting to be sold. The human children were unloaded into sterile white rooms. Cartel technicians scanned each child with glowing devices, recording their physical abilities and mental capacity. Emma watched them work with cold efficiency, treating the children like cargo rather than living beings. Healthy specimens, one technician noted in the alien language that somehow Emma could understand through translation implants. These mammals should fetch good prices. The young ones are especially valuable for domestic work. Emma was assigned identification number 4729 and placed in a holding cell with 19 other human children. The cell was clean but cold, with sleeping mats on the floor and basic food dispensers. A force field blocked the entrance, humming with deadly energy. "Where are we?" whispered Lucy, who was only 8 years old. "Far from home," Emma replied, though she tried to keep her voice steady. The other children looked to her for answers. She did not have. Through the transparent walls, she could see corridors filled with other cells holding creatures she had never imagined, beings with scales, fur, and strange colors. Tommy was placed in a different section for younger children. Emma could not see him, but she heard his voice, sometimes echoing through the ventilation system. He was calling for their parents, for home, for his sister. Each cry felt like a knife in Emma's heart. The Cartel guards treated their prisoners with casual indifference. Food arrived twice a day through automated systems. Exercise periods were brief and supervised. Medical checkups ensured the merchandise remained healthy. The children were property now, nothing more. Days passed in the cold facility. Emma learned the routines and began to understand the layout of their prison. She memorized guard schedules and noticed which areas had fewer security cameras. Hope was dangerous, but she could not let it die completely. Meanwhile, far across space, the distress signal from Haven's Rest finally reached Earth. The message traveled through communication relays, growing weaker with each jump, but carrying desperate words from parents who had lost everything. When it arrived at Terran Defense Coalition headquarters, Admiral Kate Sterling was in a meeting about trade routes and colonial expansion. The meeting stopped when the signal began to play. Sterling listened to the voices of mothers and fathers describing their children being taken by aliens. She watched shaky video footage of the Cartel ships and the aftermath of the raid. Her face grew harder with each passing second. When the message ended, the room was silent. Sterling stood slowly, her hands pressed flat against the conference table. She had spent 30 years in the military, fighting pirates and putting down rebellions. She had seen combat and loss and the worst that humans could do to each other. But this was different. This was something that struck at the heart of what made humanity human. "Get me every ship we have," she said quietly. "Every soldier, every weapon, every resource we can spare." She looked around the room at the other officers. Someone just made the worst mistake in galactic history. They took our children. 3 billion humans learned about Haven's Rest within 6 hours. The news networks could not stop talking about it. Families gathered around screens watching footage of empty playgrounds and crying parents. Social media exploded with anger and demands for action. In coffee shops and offices across Earth, conversations died mid-sentence as people absorbed the reality that alien slavers had stolen human children. Admiral Kate Sterling had not slept since receiving the distress call. Her office at Coalition Command buzzed with activity as officers brought reports and updates every few minutes. The largest military mobilization in human history was beginning, and Sterling was at the center of it all. Fleet Commander Rico Valdez burst through her door without knocking, something he had never done in 20 years of service. His face was red with anger, and his uniform looked like he had been awake for days. Sterling knew exactly how he felt. "Every government on Earth is demanding action," Valdez said, throwing a tablet onto her desk. "The president called me directly. Congress is voting on emergency war powers. The colonies are sending their defense fleets to rendezvous points." "Kate, they want blood," Sterling nodded grimly. "How many ships can we field?" 400 warships within the week, maybe more if we pull vessels from deep patrol. 50,000 Marines are already boarding transports. The industrial worlds have shifted to military production. Valdez paused, his voice dropping. "Sterling, we're talking about total war, against an enemy we know almost nothing about." That was the problem. Humanity had made contact with several alien species in recent decades, but most had been peaceful traders or isolationists. The Cartel Empire was something new, a predator that saw humans as prey. Earth's intelligence files on them were almost empty. Dr. Anna Cross arrived at Sterling's office carrying cases full of equipment and data pads. She was the Coalition's leading expert on alien biology, a small woman with tired eyes who had spent her career studying creatures from distant worlds. Now that expertise was desperately needed. I analyzed the tissue samples from the havens. Rest landing sites, Cross said, setting up her portable lab on Sterling's conference table. The Cartel are carbon-based, but their neural structure is completely different from ours. They communicate through pheromone releases and electromagnetic signals. Their technology runs on frequencies that would scramble human electronics. Sterling leaned forward. Weaknesses? Their reliance on chemical communication makes them vulnerable to certain compounds. I can develop weapons that target their nervous systems specifically. But I need more samples, more data. Cross looked up from her equipment. I need live subjects. That meant capturing Cartel forces, which meant finding them first. Agent Max Torres was humanity's best intelligence operative, a man who could disappear into any environment and emerge with information others could not obtain. Sterling had sent him ahead with a small team using captured alien technology from previous encounters. Torres was deep in Cartel space when Sterling's mobilization began. He had modified a stolen scout ship to mimic Cartel signatures and was gathering intelligence on their military positions. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The Cartel Empire controlled over 40 star systems and had been enslaving sentient beings for more than 3 centuries. Their slave markets operated openly, with billions of credits changing hands daily. The human children from Haven's Rest were just the latest additions to a trade network that spanned half the galaxy. Torres infiltrated a Cartel communication station and downloaded their military databases. The information he sent back to Earth painted a picture of overwhelming enemy strength. The Cartel had thousands of warships, fortified worlds, and military technology refined through centuries of conquest. But Torres also discovered something else. The Cartel viewed humans as a minor threat, barely worth noting in their strategic assessments. High Commander Volgath had filed the Haven's Rest raid as a routine operation. The children were being processed at Corvac 7 along with slaves from a dozen other species. On Earth, Sterling received Torres's intelligence while standing in the Coalition war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing ship movements across human space. Every major fleet was converging toward the jump points leading to Cartel territory. It was the largest gathering of human military force in history. They think we're primitives, Sterling said, studying the enemy assessments. They believe we'll file a diplomatic protest and give up. Commander Ben Hayes, who would lead one of the strike groups, shook his head. They don't understand us at all, do they? Sterling smiled grimly. Throughout human history, the greatest mistake an enemy could make was threatening children. Entire civilizations had fallen because they underestimated what parents would do to protect their young. The Cartel were about to learn that lesson in the hardest way possible. The industrial capacity of humanity shifted into high gear. Shipyards that normally built cargo vessels retooled to produce warships. Weapon manufacturers worked around the clock developing new systems based on Dr. Cross's research. Volunteer recruitment centers had lines stretching for blocks as millions of humans demanded the chance to fight. Emma Walsh was still trapped on Corvac 7, but she had not given up hope. She had organized the other human children, sharing information about their captors and planning for any opportunity to escape. The older kids protected the younger ones, and Emma made sure everyone stayed strong. "My dad will come for us," Tommy whispered to his sister through the ventilation system that connected their cells. "He promised he would always keep us safe." Emma closed her eyes and fought back tears. "All our parents will come," she whispered back. "They're probably looking for us right now." She was right. At that moment, Admiral Sterling was finalizing the attack plans that would bring 400 human warships screaming toward Corvac 7. Dr. Cross was loading biological weapons onto assault ships. Agent Torres was sabotaging Cartel communication, networks from the inside. High Commander Volgath received his first reports of human military movements 3 days after the raids. His staff assured him that the primitive humans were just posturing, making empty threats they could not back up. The Cartel Empire had faced dozens of angry species over the centuries. They all eventually accepted their losses and moved on. Volgath made a note to increase security at the slave processing centers, but otherwise dismissed the human response as irrelevant. His greatest mistake was assuming that all species thought, like the Cartel, that they would calculate costs and benefits before acting. He could not imagine a species that would risk everything for their young. Sterling stood on the bridge of her flagship, the dreadnought Vengeance, as human fleets jumped toward their targets. The rescue mission was about to begin, but she knew it would not end with simply recovering the children. The Cartel had declared war on humanity the moment they decided human children were acceptable prey. "All ships report ready for combat," Commander Valdez announced. Sterling nodded. "Then let's go get our kids back." Behind them, Earth's industrial worlds continued producing weapons and ships. Humanity was fully committed now, and there would be no half measures. The Cartel Empire was about to face something they had never encountered before, a species that would burn down the galaxy to protect its children. The Cartel convoy was traveling through the Proxima Drift when human ships appeared from nowhere. 3 Cartel cargo vessels and their escorts had been moving slave shipments between processing centers, following routes they had used safely for decades. Commander Veltar was reviewing purchase orders when his sensors screamed warnings about incoming vessels. The human ships looked strange to Cartel eyes, angular and aggressive, where Cartel vessels were smooth and curved. Captain David Park commanded, the destroyer Retribution, at the head of the human formation. His crew had been awake for 36 hours straight, running on anger and determination. "Cartel ships, this is Captain Park of the Terran Defense Coalition," he broadcast on all frequencies. "You are carrying stolen human children. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Veltar laughed at the transmission. His 3 ships carried over 500 slaves from a dozen species, including 37 humans from various raids. The escort vessels were armed with weapons that had conquered countless systems. These primitive humans must be insane to challenge the might of the Cartel Empire. "Destroy them," Veltar ordered his escorts. "Make an example of their arrogance." The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness of space. Cartel plasma cannons struck human shields, causing damage but not the instant destruction the aliens expected. Human kinetic weapons punched through Cartel armor with devastating effect. Both sides quickly realized this would not be the easy victory they had anticipated. Park watched his tactical display as the enemy escort moved to intercept. The Cartel ship was larger and more heavily armed, but it moved with the arrogance of a species that had never faced real resistance. Human ships had been designed by engineers who expected to fight for their lives. "Ramming speed," Park ordered his crew. "All hands, prepare for impact." The bridge fell silent. Ramming attacks were desperate tactics, usually meaning death for everyone involved. But Park's crew did not hesitate. They were fighting for children who had been stolen from their homes. Death was acceptable if it meant striking back at their captors. Retribution accelerated toward the Cartel escort at maximum velocity. The alien commander realized what was happening too late to change course. Park and his bridge crew ejected. In escape pods, seconds before their ship tore through the enemy vessel like a missile, splitting it in half. The explosion lit up both cargo ships as debris rained across their hulls. Veltar stared in shock at the wreckage of his escort. The humans had just sacrificed an entire warship to destroy one of his vessels. What kind of species fought with such insane determination? Marine Colonel Sophia Reeves was leading boarding actions against the second cargo ship. Her assault troops had been training for this moment since learning about the kidnapped children. They moved through Cartel corridors with deadly efficiency, showing no mercy to slavers. The Cartel crew fought back with discipline learned through centuries of military success. Their weapons were superior, their training was extensive, and their experience was vast. But they faced something they had never encountered before: humans fighting with absolutely nothing to lose. Reeves kicked down the door to a holding area and found dozens of children from multiple species cowering in metal cages. Among them were 12 humans, including 2 from Haven's Rest. The children looked up at her with fear and hope mixed in their eyes. "It's okay," she told them in the gentlest voice she could manage while still holding her weapon. "We're here to take you home." The Cartel guards made their last stand in the ship's control center. They had barricaded themselves behind overturned furniture and were firing at any human who tried to enter. Reeves studied the tactical situation and made a decision that would haunt her dreams for years. "Breach charges on the walls," she ordered her demolition team. "Bring the whole section down." The explosions turned the control center into a tomb. Reeves felt no satisfaction in the deaths of her enemies, but she felt no regret either. These beings had made their choice when they decided to prey on children. Meanwhile, Agent Torres was conducting his own mission deep in Cartel space. He had infiltrated their communication networks and was feeding false information to their commanders. Cartel fleets were being redirected away from human attack routes, leaving their installations vulnerable. Dr. Cross's research was paying off in unexpected ways. The biological weapons she had developed were not just effective against Cartel physiology, they were terrifying. Enemy soldiers exposed to her compounds experienced complete neural shutdown, collapsing into unconsciousness within seconds. But the Cartel were learning too. High Commander Volgath studied reports of the human attacks with growing concern. These were not the desperate thrashing of a primitive species. The humans were fighting with tactical brilliance and technological innovation that impressed even his military analysts. "They adapt faster than any species we have encountered," his chief strategist reported. "Every engagement shows new weapons, new tactics, new approaches. They are learning from each battle and improving their methods." Volgath dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "They are still primitives. Increase security at our processing centers and deploy additional fleets to the border regions. This minor rebellion will be crushed within months." On Corvac 7, Emma Walsh was listening to vibrations in the station's hull that told her something was happening. The Cartel guards seemed nervous, moving with more urgency than usual. She had organized the human children into communication networks, using the ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels. "Something's different," she whispered to Ben through a maintenance grate. "The guards are scared of something." Ben had been tracking guard patterns and noticed the changes too. "Maybe someone's coming for us," he whispered back. "Maybe our families found us." Emma closed her eyes and tried to imagine her parents searching for her across the stars. The idea seemed impossible, but she held on to it anyway. Hope was all they had in this place. The first human rescue beacons appeared in empty corridors of Corvac 7 3 days later. They were small devices that Torres had planted during a covert infiltration designed to guide rescue forces to the children's locations. Emma found one while being moved to a medical examination and hid it in her clothing. The beacon felt warm in her hands and pulsed with a soft blue light. For the first time since being taken from Haven's Rest, Emma smiled. Someone was coming for them. Someone had not forgotten about the stolen children. Commander Hayes was leading the advance force toward Corvac 7 when reports reached him about the successful rescue operations. Human forces had recovered over 200 children from various Cartel facilities, but many more remained in enemy hands. The assault on the main processing station would be the most dangerous mission yet. "Estimated enemy strength?" Hayes asked his intelligence officer. 3 battleships, multiple defense platforms, and at least 5,000 Cartel troops, came the reply. They know we're coming and they're ready for us. Hayes nodded grimly. The Cartel had stopped underestimating human determination, but it was too late. Admiral Sterling's main fleet was hours away from Corvac 7, carrying enough firepower to crack open the asteroid station and recover every stolen child inside. Volgath received word of the approaching human fleet while reviewing casualty reports from the border conflicts. His losses were mounting faster than he had expected, and human tactics were becoming more sophisticated with each engagement. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that might actually pose a threat to the Cartel Empire. Perhaps we should negotiate, his aide suggested. Return some of the humans in exchange for their withdrawal. Volgath considered the suggestion. The Cartel had never negotiated with primitives before, but these humans were proving surprisingly dangerous. Maybe it was time to cut their losses and focus on easier prey. But before he could respond, his communication systems lit up with an incoming message from the human fleet. Admiral Sterling's face appeared on his screens, her expression cold as the void of space. "Hi, Commander Volgath," she said in perfect Cartel language. "You have something that belongs to us. We're coming to take it back." The human fleet arrived at Corvac 7 like an avalanche of metal and fury. Admiral Sterling commanded from the Bridge of the Vengeance, while 400 warships took positions around the asteroid station. The sight was unlike anything the Cartel defenders had ever witnessed, an entire species mobilized for war. Emma Walsh pressed her face against the small window in her holding cell and watched human ships fill the sky. They looked different from the smooth Cartel vessels, all angles and purpose built for destruction. She recognized the symbols painted on their hulls from pictures in her history books. These were Terran Defense Coalition ships, which meant Earth had not forgotten about the stolen children. "Are those our ships?" Tommy whispered from the next cell. His voice carried hope for the first time in weeks. "Yes," Emma replied, tears streaming down her face. "Our people came for us." High Commander Volgath stood in the command center of Corvac 7, surrounded by tactical displays showing the overwhelming human force. His 3 battleships and defense platforms looked tiny compared to the fleet that had come to reclaim the prisoners. He had underestimated these mammals catastrophically. "Incoming transmission from the human admiral," his communications officer reported. Sterling's image appeared on the main screen. Her uniform was crisp, her bearing military, but her eyes burned with the fury of a species that had been pushed beyond all limits. Volgath had seen many enemies over his long career, but none had looked at him with such pure hatred. "High Commander," Sterling said, her voice deadly calm. "You are holding 127 human children aboard that station. You will release them immediately, along with any other sentient beings you have enslaved. You have 10 minutes to comply." Volgath activated his own transmission. "Admiral Sterling, you are vastly outnumbered. My empire spans 40 systems and commands thousands of warships. Withdraw now, and I will consider returning some of your younglings in exchange for favorable trade agreements." Sterling's expression did not change. "You misunderstand the situation, High Commander. This is not a negotiation. This is a rescue operation. In 9 minutes and 30 seconds, we begin our attack." The channel closed. Volgath turned to his tactical officer, trying to project confidence he did not feel. "Deploy all defense platforms. Signal the fleet to prepare for battle. These primitives will learn the cost of challenging the Cartel Empire." But as he spoke, Volgath realized something that chilled him to his core. The human admiral had not threatened him or boasted about her forces. She had simply stated facts with the certainty of someone who had already won. These were not the actions of primitives making desperate threats. Colonel Reeves was aboard the assault transport Freedom's Edge with 3,000 Marines, all volunteers who had begged for the chance to participate in the rescue mission. The transport shuddered as Cartel weapons struck its shields, but the assault craft continued toward their landing zones on the asteroid's surface. "Remember," Reeves addressed her troops over the comm system. "We are not here for glory or conquest. We are here to bring our children home. Every second we waste is another second they remain in captivity." The Marines checked their weapons one final time. Dr. Cross had provided them with ammunition specifically designed to incapacitate Cartel physiology without permanent harm. Humanity was angry, but they were not monsters. They would show mercy to enemies who surrendered. Sterling watched the tactical display as her ships engaged the Cartel defenses. Human weapons had been designed with this moment in mind, incorporating everything learned from previous encounters. Kinetic penetrators punched through alien shields while electromagnetic pulse warheads disabled their targeting systems. Commander Hayes led a squadron of destroyers against the first Cartel battleship. The enemy vessel was twice the size of his flagship, armed with weapons that could vaporize smaller ships with single shots. But Hayes had something the Cartel commander lacked: absolute certainty in his cause. "All ships, concentrate fire on their weapon ports," Hayes ordered. "We disable them. We don't destroy them unnecessarily." The human attack was precise and overwhelming. Within minutes, the first Cartel battleship was listing helplessly, its weapons offline and its crew surrendering. The remaining defenders realized they were not facing wild berserkers, but disciplined military forces with superior tactics and technology. Inside Corvac 7, Cartel guards were abandoning their posts as human boarding parties swept through the corridors. The electromagnetic pulse weapons Dr. Cross had developed caused complete nervous system shutdown in the alien species, leaving them unconscious but alive. Emma heard the sounds of battle growing closer to their section. Explosions echoed through the station's hull, and she could hear human voices shouting orders in the distance. Her heart raced with excitement and fear. Rescue was coming. But would they survive the battle raging around them? "Stay down," she called to the other children. "Our people are here, but we need to stay safe until they reach us." The first human soldiers to reach the children's section were members of Reeves's elite rescue teams. They moved with professional efficiency, scanning each cell and cataloging prisoners. When they reached Emma's holding area, the lead soldier's tough expression softened at the sight of frightened children. "United States Marine Corps," he announced, his voice gentle despite the battle armor he wore. "We're here to take you home." Emma started crying as the force field around her cell deactivated. She had been strong for the other children for so long, but seeing the Marine's kind face broke down all her defenses. He knelt beside her and spoke in the same tone her father used when she had nightmares. "You're safe now," he promised. "Your parents are waiting for you." The rescue proceeded with military precision. Each child was checked by medics, given warm blankets, and escorted to secure areas. Tommy was reunited with Emma in the station's main docking bay, where human ships waited to carry them home. But as Sterling reviewed the prisoner manifests, her expression grew darker. 23 children were missing. They had already been sold and shipped to other parts of Cartel space. The rescue was successful, but incomplete. Volgath attempted to surrender as his final battleship lost power and drifted helplessly. He activated an emergency transmission to Sterling's flagship, expecting to negotiate terms like he had with dozens of other defeated enemies. "Admiral Sterling," he said, trying to sound diplomatic despite his desperate situation, "you have achieved a remarkable victory. Your people fight with honor. Perhaps we can discuss the return of your remaining younglings in exchange for safe passage for my surviving forces." Sterling appeared on his screen one final time. Her expression was stone cold, and her next words would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. "Hi, Commander. You seem to think this was about rescuing our children. That was just the beginning." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You took our kids. Now we're coming for all of them. And we're going to make sure this never happens again to anyone's children." The transmission ended, leaving Volgath staring at a blank screen. Around him, his command staff looked equally stunned. They had expected the humans to claim their victory and withdraw. Instead, it seemed like the rescue was just the opening move in a much larger game. Emma stood in the docking bay of a human rescue ship, holding Tommy tightly as they waited for departure. She could see Corvac 7 through the viewport, surrounded by the massive human fleet. Other children from dozens of species were being loaded aboard rescue vessels, all of them freed from Cartel slavery. "Are we going home now?" Tommy asked. Emma looked at the determination on the faces of the human soldiers around them. She heard the officers discussing plans for tracking down the remaining kidnapped children. She saw the cold fury in Admiral Sterling's eyes when the Admiral visited the rescued children personally. "Yes," Emma told her brother. "We're going home. But I think our people are just getting started." The Cartel homeworld had never been attacked in its 3,000-year history. Ancient cities sprawled across continents, protected by orbital defense networks that had deterred enemies for centuries. High Commander Volgath stood on his palace balcony, watching human ships fill the sky like dark clouds before a storm. The war that began as a rescue mission had consumed half the galaxy. For 8 months, human forces had systematically dismantled the Cartel empire piece by piece. Every slave market was destroyed, every processing center liberated, every military installation reduced to smoking rubble. The 23 missing children had been recovered in dramatic raids across a dozen star systems. Captain Alex Morgan commanded the deep strike force that had crippled Cartel shipyards throughout their territory. Her crews worked without rest, destroying the infrastructure that supported their slave trade. The Cartel tried to rebuild, but human forces adapted faster than their enemies could recover. "Industrial Complex Delta 7 is offline," Morgan reported to Admiral Sterling. "That's the last major shipyard in the outer colonies. The Cartel war machine is effectively broken." Sterling acknowledged the report from her command ship orbiting the Cartel homeworld. Around her, the largest human fleet ever assembled prepared for the final assault. 800 warships surrounded the planet, carrying enough firepower to crack continents. But Sterling was not here for genocide. She was here to end slavery forever. The Cartel government had tried everything to stop the human advance. They offered tribute, territory, even their entire military fleet in exchange for peace. But humanity's demands never changed. Complete abolition of slavery, release of all prisoners, and accountability for crimes against sentient beings. Dr. Cross monitored the biological weapon systems from her laboratory aboard Sterling's flagship. Her research had produced compounds that could selectively target Cartel neural pathways, causing unconsciousness without permanent damage. She took no pleasure in her work, but she understood its necessity. "Admiral," she reported, "the pacification compounds are ready for deployment. We can neutralize their entire population within hours if necessary." Sterling nodded grimly. She hoped it would not come to that, but humanity was prepared for any level of escalation. The Cartel had made the choice to become slavers. Now they would face the consequences. On the planet below, Volgath received the final terms of surrender from his military council. The humans demanded complete capitulation, war crimes trials for all involved in the slave trade, and transformation of the entire Cartel government under human oversight. It was the end of everything his species had built. "Perhaps we could negotiate partial terms," his aide suggested desperately. "Offer them half our territory in exchange for independence." Volgath laughed bitterly. "You still do not understand these creatures. They are not here for territory or resources. They are here because we touched their young. There will be no negotiation." Emma Walsh stood in the observation deck of a human cruiser, watching the final battle preparations. She was 16 now, older and harder than the 12-year-old girl, who had been taken from Haven's Rest. The experience had changed her. but it had also given her purpose. The Children's Covenant will prevent this from happening to anyone else, she told the younger rescued children who looked to her for guidance. No species will ever again profit from enslaving the young. The Covenant was humanity's gift to the galaxy, a law enforced by human fleets that made targeting juveniles of any species an act of war against Earth. Other civilizations had eagerly signed the agreement, grateful for protection against predators, like the Cartel. Tommy Walsh, now 15, served as a junior communications officer on the same ship as his sister. The military had offered both siblings the chance to return to normal life, but they had chosen to see the war through to its end. Too many other children were still suffering to simply go home and forget. Incoming transmission from the Cartel. "Leadership," Tommy announced. "They're requesting direct communication with Admiral Sterling." The message that followed would end the war and reshape galactic civilization. Volgath appeared on screens throughout the human fleet, his proud bearing, finally broken by months of devastating defeats. "Admiral Sterling," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "The Cartel Empire surrenders unconditionally. We accept all terms and place ourselves under human authority." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Before I die, I must ask, why did you not stop after recovering your children? You could have claimed victory and returned home." Sterling's response was broadcast across the galaxy, heard by every species that had ever feared the Cartel or suffered under their rule. Her words would be remembered for 1,000 years as the moment when humanity declared its intentions to the stars. "Because we learned something about you, High Commander. You were not content to simply take our children. You would have come back for more. You would have expanded your slave trade to other species, other worlds, other families." Her voice grew harder with each word. "We decided that was unacceptable." Volgath nodded slowly, finally understanding the nature of his enemies. "You destroyed an empire to protect children you had never met." "We destroyed an empire to protect all children," Sterling corrected. "Your species made slavery profitable. We made it impossible." The Cartel homeworlds surrendered without firing a shot. Their orbital defenses powered down, their fleets stood aside, and their government officials prepared for human occupation. The sight of 800 human warships had convinced even the most stubborn military leaders that resistance was futile. Commander Ben Hayes led the occupation forces that landed in the Cartel capital city. The aliens who emerged to meet them moved with the defeated posture of a broken people. Some wept openly, mourning the end of their empire. Others looked curious about their human conquerors. "We are not here as destroyers," Hayes announced to the gathered crowds. "We are here to help you become better than what you were." Slavery ends today. Freedom begins tomorrow. The transformation of Cartel society would take decades, but it began immediately. Human administrators worked with reformed Cartel leaders to establish new governments based on the protection of sentient rights. The former slave markets became schools and hospitals. The processing centers became refugee assistance facilities. Dr. Cross found herself overseeing medical care for former slaves from dozens of species. Her biological weapons research had evolved into treatments for the trauma and conditioning inflicted by their captors. It was more satisfying work than developing instruments of war. "The psychological damage will take years to heal," she reported, to Sterling. "But these beings will recover. They will have normal lives again." Emma Walsh walked through the ruins of Corvac 7, now converted into a memorial for all victims of slavery. Her footsteps echoed in corridors where she had once been imprisoned, but the fear was gone. This place could no longer hurt anyone. At the memorial's center stood a simple monument with words in every known language. "Never again will the young suffer for the greed of others." Below it was a list of names. Every child who had been enslaved by the Cartel, including those who had not survived to see freedom. Tommy joined his sister at the memorial. both of them older now and marked by experiences no child should have, endured. But they had survived, and they had made sure others would not face the same fate. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Tommy asked, looking at the names carved in stone. Emma considered the question carefully. The war had cost millions of lives and destroyed an entire civilization, but it had also freed billions of enslaved beings and established protections that would last for generations. "The Cartel made their choice when they decided children were property," she said finally. "We just showed them the consequences." Admiral Sterling stood in her ready room aboard the Vengeance, preparing for the journey home to Earth. The war was over, but humanity's commitment to protecting the innocent would continue. Human fleets now patrolled trade routes, watching for any signs of slavery or exploitation. The galaxy had changed forever. Species that had lived in fear of the Cartel now traded freely under human protection. The Children's Covenant had been signed by over 200 civilizations, creating a network of mutual defense that made slavery economically impossible. Volgath spent his final days in a comfortable prison, writing memoirs that would serve as a warning to future generations. His last entry contained a message that would echo through galactic history. "We thought we were predators, and humans were prey. We were wrong. Humans are not predators or prey, they are guardians, and guardians do not negotiate with those who threaten children." The former High Commander died peacefully in his sleep, his empire transformed into something unrecognizable. The Cartel had become protectors of the young, their military reformed to serve humanitarian missions across the galaxy. Emma Walsh returned to Haven's Rest for the first time in 3 years. The colony had grown during the war, becoming a center for refugee assistance and cultural exchange. Her parents waited at the spaceport, older now but still recognizable as the people who had raised her to be strong. "Welcome home," her mother whispered, holding both her children tightly. Emma looked around at the thriving colony, at the mix of human and alien families who had made new lives here. Children of a dozen species played together in the same fields, where she had been captured so long ago. The nightmare was over, replaced by something better. "We all made it home," she replied, thinking of the billions of beings who had been freed by humanity's intervention. "All of us." Sterling's final report to the Terran Defense Coalition was brief and factual, but it contained a warning that would guide human policy for centuries to come. The galaxy is full of predators who see weakness as opportunity. They will test our resolve, probe our defenses, and look for chances to profit from suffering. They should know that humanity's response will always be the same: touch our children or anyone's children and face annihilation. The war that began with 127 kidnapped children had ended with the liberation of an entire galaxy. Humanity had not sought to become the guardians of galactic civilization, but that role had been thrust upon them by their unwillingness to accept injustice. And across the stars, in stations and colonies and homeworlds beyond counting, children slept safely in their beds, protected by the knowledge that someone was watching over them. The humans had made a promise, written in the ashes of an empire. Never again would the young suffer for the greed of others. The galaxy remembered that promise, and it was enough.